Round. The Apache widow whispered, "Please, be gentle." The rancher's next move changed everything. The sun was slowly lowering behind the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the sprawling Arizona plains. The air was dry but carried the faint scent of wild sage and earth warmed by the afternoon sun. Thomas Keaton, a man in his early 40s with strong arms and weathered skin, was moving carefully along the edge of his ranch. His hands, calloused from years of labor, gripped the wooden posts of a fence as he repaired it. The wind tugged gently at his shirt, and the distant mountains looked almost purple in the fading light. This was his life: long hours, endless work, and the quiet company of the land. Thomas had lived on the ranch all his life. He knew every ridge, every ditch, every turn of the trail. It was hard work, but it gave him a sense of peace, a sense that he belonged to something larger than himself. The ranch was more than a piece of property. It was a legacy, built by his father and his grandfather before him. Yet, despite the land, the animals, and the steady rhythm of life, Thomas often felt a quiet loneliness. His family had moved away years ago, and most of the neighboring ranchers kept to themselves. He had learned to live with the silence, but sometimes it pressed down on him in ways that even the open plains could not fix. On that evening, as Thomas worked, he noticed something unusual on the dusty trail leading to the ranch. A figure was walking slowly, moving with careful steps that seemed almost measured against the weight of the ground. At first he thought it might be a traveler or someone lost. But as the figure drew closer, he realized it was an elderly woman. She moved with a cautious grace, her eyes scanning the land as if searching for something familiar. Her hair was streaked with silver, and the lines on her face spoke of years of both hardship and quiet strength. Carried a small bundle close to her chest, wrapped in a worn cloth, and each step seemed heavy yet determined. Thomas stopped his work for a moment, squinting against the low sun. He wasn't used to visitors. The ranch was far from the nearest town, and most people passing through were travelers who stayed briefly before continuing on their journey. Breaths. Yet, there was something different about this woman. She did not look lost. She did not look hurried. There was a quiet dignity in her movements, and even from a distance, Thomas sensed the weight of her story. Breaths. As she came closer, he could hear her voice, soft and trembling, carrying across the wind. "Please, be gentle," she said, almost like a whisper to herself. The words were not directed at him, but when they reached his ears, Thomas felt a curious tug in his chest. There was no fear in her tone, only a fragile plea, a request that carried more than just caution. It was a plea for understanding, for care, for someone to treat her presence with respect. Thomas straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. He stepped forward slowly, keeping his movements calm so as not to startle her. "Pray." "Hello," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "Can I help you?" The woman paused, her eyes meeting his. There was a brief moment of hesitation, a silent measure of trust being considered. Then she nodded slightly, her lips pressing together as if to keep from speaking too much. She came closer, each step careful, almost ceremonial, until she reached the edge of the fence where Thomas stood. "My name is Layla," she said finally, her voice low but clear. "Bray. I have nowhere else to go." She set her small bundle down on the ground. It was light, containing only a few herbs, some handmade pottery, and a folded piece of cloth. Her hands shook slightly as she arranged her things, and Thomas could see that she was tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. Her eyes, dark and deep, carried grief. He realized that she had lost someone important, someone irreplaceable. Perhaps a husband, a partner, a lifelong companion. Thomas nodded slowly. "You're welcome here," he said. "Come inside." I can give you some water and food and you can rest." He noticed her wary look, the way she hesitated before taking a step forward, and he added, "You don't need to be afraid." Lella's shoulders relaxed slightly, but she moved toward the ranch house, careful to keep the bundle with her. Thomas followed, opening the heavy wooden door and stepping aside. The interior smelled faintly of wood smoke and leather, a comforting, familiar scent that spoke of home and safety. Layla's eyes scanned the room, taking in the simple furnishings, the well-worn table, and the small stove in the corner. It was modest, but it carried the warmth of a life lived with care and purpose. Thomas poured her a cup of water from a clay pitcher. She took it slowly, as if tasting the liquid might reveal something about the man who offered it. "Thank you," she whispered. I have been traveling for many days. The roads are not kind to someone alone." Psst. Thomas nodded, understanding more than she could know. Life in these parts was harsh. The sun could be merciless, the storm sudden and fierce, and the nights could stretch long and cold. Yet there was also beauty, wild flowers in spring, the sound of coyotes at dusk, and the endless sky that seemed to hold the world in its vast embrace. He hoped she could see some of that beauty here. "I'll show you where you can rest," he said, leading her to a small room at the back of the house. The bed was simple, with a clean quilt folded neatly at the foot. Layla looked at it with surprise and gratitude. "It's been so long since I've slept under a roof," she said softly, "since I had a place to call my own." Thomas offered a reassuring smile. "It's yours for as long as you need. You're safe here." He could see the tension in her body ease, the way her hands unclenched and her shoulders lowered. It was a small victory, a moment of connection that mattered more than words could express. After she settled, Layla shared a few stories of her past. She spoke of her village, of the life she had led before tragedy struck, and of the love she had lost. Thomas listened quietly, learning about the traditions of her people, the ways they cared for the land, the wisdom passed down through generations. There was a rhythm to her speech, a quiet cadence that seemed to carry the weight of memory and time. Thomas realized that he had never met anyone like her. There was strength in her gentleness, resilience in her sorrow, and a grace that could not be measured by her age or her appearance. He felt an unspoken responsibility, a desire to ensure that this woman, who had trusted him enough to enter his life, would find some peace here. As the evening deepened and the last light faded from the sky, Thomas and Lala sat together in silence. The wind rustled the curtains, carrying the scent of sage from outside. In that quiet, both of them felt a sense of calm that neither had expected. The land around them was vast and open, yet the room felt full of life and possibility. Thomas thought about the future. Uncertain as it was, he knew that bringing someone new into his life would change things. The ranch would not be the same, and his routines would be interrupted. Yet, looking at Layla, he understood that some changes were worth embracing. Some connections were too rare, too valuable, to ignore. Layla, meanwhile, felt a fragile hope stir within her. For she had spent so long alone, moving from place to place, carrying the weight of loss and memory. But here, in this simple ranch house on the wide Arizona plains, she felt something she had not felt in years. Safety, respect, and a possibility of new beginnings. Her whispered plea earlier in the day, "Please, be gentle," had been answered, and she allowed herself to believe, just a little, that life could still hold kindness and trust. That night, as the stars emerged one by one in the dark sky, Thomas checked the fences one last time before heading to bed. He paused for a moment, looking at the distant hills, the sprawling plains, and the small figure of Layla resting inside. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, what challenges they would face, or how their lives might change, but for the first time in a long while he felt a quiet certainty that some unexpected meetings could alter the course of life in ways no one could predict. The ranch, vast and enduring, had welcomed a new presence. And in the hearts of both Thomas and Layla, a story had begun that neither had anticipated. A story built on trust, respect, and the fragile yet powerful hope that two lives so different yet so connected could find a place together in the wide open world. Life on the ranch was never easy. The sun rose early, painting the plains in soft shades of gold and pink, and it was already high in the sky before Thomas could take a short break. He had chores that never ended, feeding the cattle, checking fences, repairing barns, and making sure that everything on the ranch ran smoothly. It was hard work, the kind that left your muscles aching and your hands roughened, but Thomas had spent his whole life doing it. He liked the rhythm, the predictability, and the sense of purpose it gave him. Lela tried to adjust to this new life, but it was not simple, but decimes. She was used to her village, where everything was familiar, where people knew her and where the routines were different. The ranch was wide and empty, and the work was unfamiliar. Carrying water from the well, tending to animals, and moving quickly across uneven ground were things she had never done before. Some mornings she would wake exhausted, her muscles sore, and wonder if she could continue. But Thomas never pressured her. He understood that she was learning, and he gave her space to adjust. Despite the difficulties, there were small moments that made life feel worthwhile. Lela would spend time in the small garden behind the house, planting seeds and tending the plants. She had brought some seeds with her, small treasures from her home, and she treated them with care. Watching the tiny sprouts push through the soil gave her a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that she could still nurture life even after loss. Thomas noticed the careful way she worked, the patience and attention she gave to each plant. He had never seen anyone treat the land with such quiet reverence. The neighbors watched the new arrangement with curiosity. Some whispered behind fences, wondering why a woman alone had come to live with Thomas Keaton. Others were skeptical, unsure if the two would get along. But Thomas did not care about gossip. He had learned long ago that life was not about what others thought, but about how you treated the people you cared for. Lela noticed the cautious glances from neighbors, but rarely commented. She preferred to focus on the work and the quiet peace of the land. One morning, the first real challenge arrived. A sudden storm rolled in from the west, dark clouds gathering quickly over the plains. The wind whipped across the fields, carrying dust and debris. The air felt heavy, charged with the tension of approaching rain. Thomas ran from one end of the ranch to the other, checking the fences, securing the barn doors, and making sure the cattle were safe. The storm had the power to destroy months of work if they were not careful. Lela, watching from the porch, felt a surge of fear. She had never faced storms like this before, where the wind seemed to carry a dangerous force across the land. But Thomas called her over, his voice calm and steady. "Come help me with the cattle. We need every hand we can get." At first, she hesitated. She had never worked with cattle before, and the thought of stepping into a field in the storm made her anxious. But Thomas's steady gaze gave her courage. She nodded and followed him, carrying what little supplies they would need. Together, they moved among the animals, calming them, guiding them to higher ground, and securing the gates. Lela was surprised by her own ability to act under pressure. Her hands moved quickly, following instructions, and she felt a sense of strength she had not realized she possessed. The storm lasted for hours. Rain poured down, soaking clothes and mud splashing beneath their boots. The wind howled through the fences, rattling the wood and shaking the barn doors. Yet they worked together, their movements coordinated, without much speaking. Thomas began to see that Leila's calm, deliberate nature was a gift. She did not panic, she did not complain, and she remained focused even when the storm seemed overwhelming. Her instincts, shaped by a lifetime of observation and survival, helped him save many of the cattle from harm. By the time the storm passed, the sky cleared, revealing a rainbow stretching across the horizon, but Thomas and Layla stood side by side, breathing heavily, their clothes soaked and their hands muddy. They looked at the fields now glistening with rain, and at the cattle who had found shelter thanks to their efforts. Leah smiled faintly, her eyes bright despite the exhaustion. "We did it," she said softly. Desk. Thomas nodded. "Yes, we did. I couldn't have done it without you." There was a sincerity in his voice that made Layla feel seen, recognized for her efforts, and appreciated. For the first time, she felt that she truly belonged somewhere. She had come to the ranch as a stranger, carrying only memories of her past and the sorrow of loss, but now she had a purpose, a place, and a partner who valued her contribution. Over the next few weeks, their routine settled into a pattern. Lala learned to carry water efficiently, to help with the animals, and even to repair small breaks in the fences. Thomas learned to trust her instincts, to let her take the lead when she had a better sense of what needed to be done. Partnership was built slowly, through quiet observation, shared effort, and small acts of respect. Each day they discovered new ways to understand each other without speaking too much. Evenings became their time of connection. After a long day of work, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the plains in shades of orange and purple. Layla shared stories of her childhood, of her family, and of the traditions of her people. She spoke of ceremonies, songs, and the careful knowledge of nature passed down through generations. Thomas listened, fascinated by her words, and sometimes asked questions to learn more. He was careful to respect her boundaries, never pushing her to reveal more than she wanted. In return, Thomas shared his own stories of life on the ranch, of the challenges and rewards of managing the land, and of the lessons his father had taught him. Layla listened, intrigued by the way he spoke about the animals, the seasons, and the endless rhythm of ranch life. Slowly a bridge formed between them, connecting two very different lives through shared understanding and respect. Yet life on the ranch was not without challenges. There were days when equipment broke, when animals fell ill, or when neighbors' disputes created tension. Lala sometimes worried that they would not be able to handle everything, but Thomas always reminded her to stay calm and approach each problem step by step. He had patience, and he tried to instill the same patience in her. "The land teaches us," he would say. "We have to listen and work with it, not fight against it." One day a young calf fell into a small ravine near the edge of the property. It cried out, frightened and alone. Thomas ran to help, but Layla followed without hesitation. Together they carefully guided the calf out, calming it with gentle words and steady hands. The calf finally stood, trembling but safe, and they exchanged a quiet smile. These small victories, these moments of cooperation, reinforced their growing bond. Thomas began to notice other changes in Layla. She moved with more confidence, her hands steady, her steps assured. She laughed more, smiled more, and seemed lighter in spirit. He realized that the ranch, with its wide open spaces and steady rhythm, was giving her something she had not had in years: stability, a sense of safety, and a place where she could be herself. For Layla, the changes were even deeper. She had carried grief and solitude for so long that she thought she would never feel at peace again. But here, working alongside Thomas, helping with the animals, tending the garden, and navigating the challenges of ranch life, she found a sense of belonging she had almost forgotten existed. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was becoming a home. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills, Lela whispered softly, almost to herself. I never thought I could feel this way again. Thomas, standing nearby, heard her words and understood. He did not answer with words, he simply nodded, acknowledging the depth of her feelings. There was a quiet understanding between them now, one built not on words alone but on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the slow, steady growth of trust. Life on the ranch continued, each day bringing its own challenges and rewards. The sun rose and set, the seasons changed, and Thomas and Lela faced each obstacle together. Through storms, accidents, and the simple, repetitive work of daily life, they discovered that partnership was more than sharing tasks. It was sharing strength, patience, and compassion. Each small success, each problem solved together strengthened the bond between them, forming a foundation that would carry them through even the hardest times. By the end of the season, Lela had settled into a rhythm she had never imagined possible. She moved confidently across the ranch, her presence calm and steady. Thomas, in turn, had learned to value her perspective, to rely on her instincts, and to appreciate the quiet strength she brought into his life. The ranch was no longer just his alone. It belonged in a small but meaningful way to both of them. And as the sun set, painting the plains in soft pinks and purples once again, they stood side by side, looking out over the land they cared for. But neither spoke, but both felt a deep satisfaction. Life was hard, yes, and challenges were never-ending, but together they were stronger, braver, and more capable than they had ever been alone. The storm had passed, the work was done, and for the first time in many years both felt a quiet hope for the future. The days on the ranch began to take on a rhythm that was both familiar and comforting. Thomas had always been used to the long hours, the steady work, and the endless sky above the plains. But now, with Lela by his side, each day felt a little different. She moved through the tasks with quiet determination, learning quickly how to handle the animals, tend the garden, and repair the fences. But more than her skill, it was her presence that changed the atmosphere of the ranch. Early one morning, as the sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks, Thomas was leading the horses out to the grazing field. Psst! Lela followed closely, carrying a small bucket of feed. The wind blew gently, rustling the tall grass and carrying the sweet scent of wildflowers across the land. Lela paused for a moment, letting the cool breeze touch her face, and Thomas noticed how she seemed to be taking everything in. Not just the work, but the beauty of the plains. You like it here, don't you? Thomas asked, glancing at her. Lela smiled faintly. I do, she said softly. It's different from where I came from, but it feels peaceful. And safe. Her words carried more meaning than she realized. For years she had wandered, carrying the weight of loss and the uncertainty of life. For the first time she felt a sense of stability, a feeling that someone cared enough to let her belong. Breath. Thomas nodded, understanding. It takes time, he said. But the land has a way of teaching patience, and it teaches respect. Lela's eyes followed the horses grazing in the distance, their soft movements and low hum of contentment filling the air. She had never worked so closely with animals before. In her village she had known livestock, but it was never her responsibility to care for them fully. Now she found herself learning to notice subtle changes, the way a horse shifted its weight, the way a cow called to its calf. She learned to anticipate needs, to act before problems became disasters. And Thomas watched her quietly, impressed by her quick understanding and careful attention. The connection between them was growing, not in words, but in gestures and shared experiences. One afternoon, as Thomas repaired a section of fencing, Lela came to help, holding nails and hammer without being asked. She observed how he worked, noticing the slight tilt of the post, the way he tested the tension of the wire. When he paused to adjust a post, she offered quietly. You need the other side secured first. It will hold better. Thomas looked at her, surprised. You're right, he said, smiling. Her suggestion was simple, but it showed an understanding beyond what he had expected. In that moment, he realized that Lela's patience and observation were not just useful. They were invaluable. Her presence was becoming a steadying force, calming him and guiding him in ways he hadn't even known he needed. That evening, after the chores were done, they sat on the porch together. The sky was painted with deep reds and purples as the sun disappeared behind the hills. Lela held a small notebook in her lap, sketching plants and animals she observed on the ranch. Thomas watched her, fascinated by the careful lines she drew, the attention she gave to detail. You have a talent, he said quietly. You notice things I would miss. Lela looked up, a hint of shyness in her eyes. Breatha said, I like to observe, she said softly. It helps me understand. There was a pause, filled only by the sounds of the evening, the chirping of crickets, the distant lowing of cattle, and the whisper of wind through the grass. But slowly, the moments between them began to speak louder than words. They shared quiet meals, laughter over small mistakes, and conversations about life and loss. Breaths. Lela spoke of her husband, describing him with warmth and sadness. She told stories of the traditions she had grown up with, of ceremonies, songs, and the ways her people connected with the land. Thomas listened, often quietly, sometimes asking questions, always careful not to interrupt or push too far. He could feel the depth of her memories, the strength of her loss. In return, Thomas shared stories of his childhood on the ranch. He spoke of the lessons his father had taught him, the hard work of keeping the land running, and the quiet satisfaction that came from a day's labor. Lela listened with interest, noticing how much of his life was tied to the land, to routines, and to care for the animals. She began to understand why Thomas was so patient, so steady, and so reliable. One afternoon, while repairing a section of the barn roof, Lela lost her balance and slipped. She caught herself just in time, but her wrist hit the wooden beam. Pain shot through her arm, and she cried out softly. Brostis, Thomas, who was nearby, dropped his tools immediately and rushed to her side. Are you okay? He asked, concern etched on his face. Lela shook her head, holding her wrist. I think I sprained it, she admitted, her voice tight with discomfort. Thomas carefully took her hand and inspected it. His touch was gentle but firm, and he guided her to sit down. He wrapped her wrist with a cloth and then applied pressure to keep it supported. Throughout the process, Lela whispered, almost reflexively, Please, be gentle. Thomas smiled softly. I am, he said. I will take care of you. That moment, small as it seemed, carried a weight neither of them could ignore. Breaths. It was not romance, at least not yet, but it was something stronger in its own way. A trust built from experience, from care, from knowing that the other would not hurt you. Lela felt herself relax under his attention, and Thomas felt a new sense of responsibility, realizing that her well-being was now intertwined with his own. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between them grew stronger. They faced challenges together, fixing broken fences, tending to sick animals, and navigating the unexpected problems that came with ranch life. Each task, each obstacle, became a way to learn more about each other. Thomas began to rely on Lela's intuition and careful attention, and she found herself trusting his experience and steady hand. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat quietly on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. Lela broke the silence first. I never imagined I could feel comfortable again, she said softly, her eyes reflecting the fading light. Thomas looked at her, understanding more than she could know. Brief. "Sometimes life gives us second chances," he said quietly. "We just have to recognize them when they come." Lela nodded, a small smile touching her lips. She thought about the long months of wandering, the endless roads, and the loneliness she had carried with her. Now she felt a sense of belonging she had almost forgotten. The ranch, the land, and Thomas's quiet presence offered something she had not expected. A home, a purpose, and a connection. Their evenings became times of reflection. Lela would often talk about her childhood, the celebrations, and the quiet lessons learned from her family. Thomas shared the simple wisdom of ranch life, teaching her how to predict the weather, how to recognize animal behavior, and how to read the land for signs of trouble. They learned from each other, not just practical skills, but patience, understanding, and the quiet ways people could care for one another. One morning, Thomas noticed Layla standing in the garden, her hands dirty with soil, but her face calm and happy. She looked up and smiled at him, holding a small sprouting plant. "It's growing," she said simply. "Breath. Even here in this new place, life keeps moving forward." Thomas nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride, not just in the plant but in her. He had seen her struggle, watched her adjust, and now saw her thriving. Her resilience, her patience, and her quiet strength had become a part of the ranch as much as the fences, the animals, and the fields. Through all of this, they learned the value of small gestures, offering a hand when needed, sharing food, listening without judgment, and understanding without words. Each act, however simple, built a foundation of trust and respect that neither had expected but both had come to rely on. By the end of the season, the ranch felt different to both of them. Layla moved confidently through the chores, helping Thomas without hesitation. Thomas watched her with a mix of admiration and quiet gratitude, realizing that her presence had transformed the ranch in ways beyond the physical. It was no longer just a place of work. It was a place of connection, learning, and shared experience. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the plains with soft hues, Thomas and Layla stood side by side, looking over the land. Neither spoke, but both felt the weight and the warmth of what they had built together. Life on the ranch was still hard, still demanding, but it was also filled with moments of beauty, trust, and growing companionship. They had learned to rely on each other, to value each other's strengths, and to care in ways that went beyond words. And in that quiet evening light, as the sky turned deep purple and the stars began to shine, both of them understood that something important had begun. It was not a loud or sudden change. It was subtle, patient, and enduring. But it was real. The bond they had forged would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead, and the quiet trust between them had already changed the rhythm of their lives. The following spring brought with it both promise and tension. The ranch was greener now, the cattle stronger, and the fields alive with new growth. Yet the peace Thomas and Lela had worked for was soon challenged in ways they had not anticipated. A dispute with a neighboring rancher, one that had been simmering quietly for months, suddenly became urgent. A small group of the neighbor's cattle had wandered into Thomas's property, grazing on land that he had carefully tended. It was a minor mistake, perhaps, but in this land, minor mistakes could lead to serious consequences. Thomas received a visit from the neighbor, a gruff man named Carl Hayes, whose sharp words carried the weight of both accusation and threat. "Your cattle are trespassing," Carl said, his voice firm. "And if this happens again, I'll take legal action." He gestured toward the fence line, where a few of his cows had indeed wandered. "I don't want trouble, Thomas, but I won't stand by and watch my property ruined." Thomas listened calmly, acknowledging the problem without anger. "I understand," he said. "We'll fix it immediately, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." But Carl was not satisfied. "That's not enough. Ah! You need to make it right, and soon. or I'll involve the authorities. His eyes lingered on Layla briefly, as if questioning her presence, but Thomas did not flinch. After Carl left, Thomas turned to Layla, noticing the tension in her posture. "We'll need to handle this carefully," he said. "I don't want conflict, but we also need to protect what's ours." Layla nodded, her mind already working through the situation. Right. She had faced disputes before, though of a different nature, in her village and with other members of her community. She knew that anger and force rarely solved problems. Patience, understanding, and strategy often worked better. "We should talk to him calmly," she suggested. "Listen to what he wants, and then offer a solution that makes sense for both of us." Thomas considered her advice. He had always been used to direct action, solving problems with his hands and hard work. But Layla's words reminded him that there were other ways that required thought, empathy, and diplomacy. Together, they decided on a plan. They would meet Carl in the middle of the next morning, calmly discuss the situation, and present a solution that acknowledged both their concerns. The next day, the air was cool and crisp as they approached the boundary where the conflict had occurred. Carl was waiting, his arms crossed and a frown on his face. Thomas spoke first, his tone measured and respectful. "Carl, I understand your concern. These cattle wandered onto your property, and I want to make sure it doesn't happen again." Layla stepped forward, her voice calm but confident. "We can work together," she said. "Perhaps we can adjust the fences or create a shared grazing schedule so this doesn't happen again." "There's no need for anger if we find a solution that works for everyone." Carl's frown softened slightly, surprised by her composed approach. He was not used to being addressed in this way, with respect and reasoning rather than confrontation. Thomas and Layla worked together, pointing out possible adjustments to the fence, discussing how to guide the cattle more carefully, and suggesting compromises that would prevent future problems. After nearly an hour of discussion, Carl nodded. I suppose that could work," he admitted grudgingly. "I just don't want my land destroyed." By the time they finished, a sense of relief passed between Thomas and Layla. They had faced the challenge without letting anger take control, using patience, planning, and cooperation to resolve the situation. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one, showing them both that together they could handle whatever difficulties came their way. The challenge with Carl also revealed another truth, that Layla's wisdom and calm nature were not just helpful, they were essential. Thomas realized that her perspective added value in ways he could not have anticipated. Desperate, she did not act impulsively or react with fear. She assessed the situation, considered all outcomes, and helped him navigate the problem with a balance he had rarely found before. Her presence had transformed the way he approached challenges, both large and small. Life on the ranch continued, but now there was a deeper understanding between them. They knew that storms, both literal and figurative, could appear without warning. The land could be unforgiving, neighbors could be difficult, and problems could arise at any moment. But they had learned that by relying on each other's strengths, they could face adversity and find solutions that preserved not only their work but their peace of mind. One day, a new challenge appeared in the form of a sudden illness among the cattle. A few cows were weak, refusing to eat, and Layla immediately noticed the signs before Thomas did. "We need to separate them and treat them," she said firmly. "If we wait, it could spread." Thomas acted quickly, trusting her judgment. Together they moved the sick animals to a safe area, cleaned the stalls, and prepared herbal remedies Layla had learned from her people. She taught Thomas how to use them carefully, explaining which plants helped digestion, which eased discomfort, and which strengthened immunity. Thomas listened attentively, following her guidance, and was amazed at her knowledge. In the past, he had relied on veterinarians or textbooks, but her practical wisdom, passed down through generations, proved equally valuable. The cattle began to recover, and Thomas realized once again that Layla's presence had changed the ranch in profound ways. She was no longer simply a companion. She was a partner in every sense, someone whose skills and insight were essential to the survival and success of their shared life. Even in moments of tension, they found ways to support each other. One afternoon, while repairing a broken gate after the storm, Thomas slipped on the wet wood and fell, twisting his ankle. Lela quickly moved to his side, helping him to stand, wrapping his ankle with a cloth, and guiding him back to the house. Her calm, careful approach prevented what could have been a serious injury, and Thomas felt a deep gratitude for her presence. As the season progressed, the bond between them grew stronger. They shared quiet moments in the evenings, sitting on the porch and watching the sun set over the hills. They talked about hopes, memories, and the future, but often they sat in comfortable silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. In these moments, both of them felt a deep sense of connection, a realization that life was not just about survival, but about trust, respect, and shared experience. One night, a particularly strong wind blew across the plains, rattling the windows and sending leaves swirling through the yard. Thomas and Layla worked together to secure the barn doors and check on the animals, moving efficiently and silently. When the wind finally subsided, they stood side by side, breathing heavily but smiling.
"We make a good team," Thomas said, his voice full of quiet admiration.
Lela nodded. "We do," she replied softly. "And we'll face whatever comes next together." That shared understanding became the foundation for everything that followed. The ranch, once a solitary place of work and routine, had become a home where two lives intertwined. They had faced challenges, solved problems, and learned to rely on each other in ways that went beyond words. Every victory, small or large, strengthened the bond between them, building a trust that neither had expected but both now depended on. By the end of spring, Thomas looked over the ranch with a new perspective. The fields were flourishing, the cattle healthy, and the fences solid. But more importantly, he looked at Layla and saw not just a companion, but a person whose insight, care, and strength had reshaped his world. She had taught him patience, the value of perspective, and the quiet power of gentle guidance. She had become, in every meaningful sense, his equal partner in life. Layla, too, felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had come to the ranch as a stranger, carrying grief and uncertainty, and now she was an essential part of its rhythm and life. She had proven to herself that she could adapt, survive, and thrive even in a new and challenging environment. But her presence on the ranch was no longer temporary. It was lasting, meaningful, and filled with purpose. And in the quiet moments, when the plains stretched endlessly beneath the sky and the sun dipped behind the hills, both Thomas and Layla understood something essential. Life's true strength did not come from facing challenges alone, but from facing them together. The storms, the disputes, the unexpected hardships, they had all tested them, but they had emerged stronger, wiser, and closer than ever. They had discovered that trust, patience, and understanding could resolve even the most difficult problems. They had learned to respect each other's strengths and rely on each other's guidance. And most importantly, they had found a bond that went beyond convenience or necessity, a bond that was rooted in care, resilience, and the quiet, steady certainty of shared experience. As the stars appeared in the night sky twinkling over the wide plains, Thomas and Layla stood together on the porch. Neither spoke, but both felt the depth of what they had accomplished. Life on the ranch would continue to bring challenges, but they knew that together they could face anything. The trust they had built, the partnership they had formed, and the quiet understanding that had grown between them would guide them through whatever lay ahead. And in that moment the ranch felt whole, not just as land or livelihood, but as a place of connection, trust, and shared life, where two people had found a way to face the world together and change it for the better. By the time summer arrived on the Arizona plains, life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm that was steady and fulfilling. The fields stretched green and alive under the warm sun. The cattle grazed peacefully, and the fences stood strong, repaired and maintained through months of effort. Thomas moved through his daily chores with a sense of purpose he had not known for years, and Lela had grown confident in every task, from feeding the animals to tending the garden to handling the unexpected problems that always seemed to appear. What had changed most, however, was not the ranch itself, but the quiet partnership between Thomas and Lela. They moved through each day with an understanding that went beyond words. They knew each other's strengths and weaknesses, habits and routines, fears and hopes. This knowledge created a bond that neither had anticipated when Lela had first walked onto the property months earlier, carrying only a small bundle and her whispered plea, "Please, be gentle." That plea had been answered in more ways than one, transforming both of their lives. One morning, as the sun rose in a cloudless sky, Thomas noticed that Lela was already at the garden, carefully inspecting the young plants and adjusting supports for the tomatoes. The early light illuminated her face, showing determination and serenity in equal measure. He walked quietly to her, carrying a small bucket of water, and offered it with a smile. "You've done so much here," he said, his voice soft but filled with admiration. "The ranch feels alive because of you." Lela looked up, startled for a moment, then smiled. "I couldn't have done it alone," she replied. Breaths. "And I don't think I would have wanted to." She gestured toward the fields, the cattle, and the barn. "This place, it has given me more than I expected. Not just a home, but a purpose." Thomas nodded, feeling the truth of her words deeply. He thought back to the first time he had seen her, wary and cautious on the dusty trail, and remembered the fragility in her voice when she asked to be treated gently. Now, she moved through the ranch with strength, confidence, and calm authority. The woman who had arrived carrying grief and uncertainty had grown into someone indispensable, both in life and in spirit. The summer brought new challenges, as it always did. One day a sudden heat wave struck the plains, drying out pastures and causing the cattle to become restless. Thomas and Lela worked together tirelessly, moving water troughs, guiding the animals to shaded areas, and monitoring their health. Lela's attention to detail and patience helped Thomas anticipate problems before they escalated. When a cow began to show signs of dehydration, Lela calmly prepared a mixture to help, explaining each step to Thomas as they worked side by side. After the cattle were safe, they took a moment to sit on the porch, catching their breath and drinking cold water. The sun beat down on the land, but the air between them was comfortable and full of quiet understanding. Thomas looked at her and realized how much she had changed not only the ranch but also him. Her presence had softened his stubbornness, tempered his impatience, and taught him the quiet power of calm, careful action. "It's strange," Thomas said, breaking the silence. "I've lived here all my life, but I feel like I'm seeing it differently now. Raving, everything feels fuller." Lela smiled, a hint of mischief in her expression. "That's because you're not alone anymore," she replied, around in despair. "When someone cares about the land and about the life on it, and when you care about someone else as well, everything changes." Thomas nodded slowly, the truth of her words settling into him. She was right. The ranch, the animals, the work. They were still important, but now they were shared. There was a new sense of meaning in everything they did together, a feeling that no task was too small, no challenge insurmountable, because they had each other. The summer also brought quiet joys. Evenings were spent on the porch, watching the sky change colors as the sun set behind the distant hills. Lela taught Thomas how to notice the subtle signs of weather in the clouds and the wind, just as she had observed in her childhood. Thomas, in turn, taught her the rhythm of ranch life, the steady way the land moved through the seasons, and how to anticipate the needs of the animals. Together they planted a small orchard, carefully choosing the trees and nurturing the young saplings. Lela took special care with the fruit trees, remembering lessons from her home about how to protect them and encourage growth. Thomas appreciated the patience and thoughtfulness she brought to every task, seeing how much more the land thrived because of her care. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, they found themselves sitting under a large mesquite tree, the warm breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Thomas passed her a cup of water, and they watched the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. "It's amazing," Lala said softly. "How vast it all is, and yet how much it feels like home." Breath. "Home isn't just the land," he said. "It's the people you share it with." Big. It was a small gesture, simple and unspoken, but it carried years of experience, trust, and care. Thomas felt the weight of it, the quiet power of companionship and mutual respect. In that moment, neither of them needed words to describe what they felt. It was understood in the ease of their movements, the steady rhythm of their lives, and the unspoken acknowledgement that they had become part of each other's world. As the summer turned to fall, the ranch became a place of stability, growth, and enduring connection. Thomas and Lela continued to work side by side, facing each new day with confidence, patience, and shared understanding. They learned to anticipate challenges, from unexpected storms to minor disputes with neighbors, and they handled each obstacle calmly and wisely. Their trust in one another had grown to a level that made them stronger than they had ever been individually. One autumn morning, Thomas walked across the fields to check the fences and noticed Lela tending the orchard. The trees were small but thriving, their leaves bright against the blue sky. He watched her carefully, noting the attention she gave to each sapling, the care in her hands and the gentle tilt of her head as she examined each branch. He realized then how much she had changed the ranch, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. Desperate presence had brought a new life to the land, a new meaning to his work, and a new depth to his days. Lela looked up and smiled when she saw him approaching. "The trees are doing well," she said proudly. "I think we'll have fruit this season." Thomas nodded, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. "Thanks to you," he said. "You've done more than I ever imagined for this place, and for me." "We've done it together," she replied. "That's what makes it real. That's what makes it last." As the days grew shorter and the evenings cooler, Thomas and Lela continued to nurture the land, care for the animals, and support each other in ways both large and small. Every storm they weathered, every challenge they overcame, and every success they celebrated together reinforced the bond they shared. They had learned that life's value was not in facing it alone, but in sharing it with someone who understands, respects, and cares deeply. By the end of the season, the ranch had transformed in more ways than one. The fields were flourishing, the cattle were healthy, and the orchard promised fruit. But more importantly, Thomas and Lela had created a life together, built on trust, respect, and quiet companionship. Their days were filled with work, yes, but also with joy, laughter, and a shared sense of purpose. On the final evening of the season, they sat on the porch together, watching the sun set behind the hills. The sky was painted in shades of orange, purple, and gold, and the land stretched endlessly before them. Lela rested her hand lightly on the railing, her face serene, while Thomas leaned back in his chair, breathing in the cool evening air. "You've changed everything," Thomas said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. Breath. "Not just the ranch, but me. You've made me see life differently." Lela turned to him, a gentle smile on her face. "And you've given me a place where I belong," she replied. "A home, a purpose, and someone to trust. That matters more than anything else." Thomas nodded, feeling the depth of her words. For months, they had faced challenges, weathered storms, and navigated the complexities of life on the plains. And through it all, they had built something lasting, something stronger than land, animals, or work. They had built trust, understanding, and a shared life that neither would ever take for granted. As the stars appeared in the night sky, twinkling above the plains, Thomas and Layla sat together in quiet contentment. The ranch was alive, the animals were safe, and the land stretched peacefully in every direction. They had faced hardship and uncertainty, but they had done so together, and that partnership had created a life that was full, meaningful, and enduring.